holy shit, is that what the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe was saying when that, because isn't that where the number 42, the joke out of that is that's the
That's a good question. I don't read. It's been a long time since I've read that book, and I probably wouldn't have picked up that meaning of it when I read it. It's been so I was so young when I did.
I so thoroughly hated that book that I can't even begin to describe it. And if that is actually where some of that meaning was, is that about subjectivity is just like what you make of it. That is
Douglas Adams is a smart guy. You should. I mean, like, whether you like his books, like, feel entirely entitled to your opinion, right? Like, I desperately dislike the Grapes of Wrath, right? But we all have books like this for various reasons. But he's definitely a smart guy, so it's possible that meaning is in there, and he's also very sarcastic and humorous, I would say. But
the absurdism of that book was you made a point about the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance during the book club that really struck me, and it was when I first started reading that book. I wasn't distracted. I had tons of time, and so I would pick it up and I'd read 10 pages and I'd read 15 pages. I read it out loud to my baby. I really enjoyed it. And then I got to the point where I got involved with another book, and I loved that book so much that I put off for 2 weeks reading Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and then all of a sudden I had a deadline. And it was almost like being back in college where I'm like, I got to get this chapter done, I got to get this done, I got to do this. And so any of the joy that came from that journey was then stripped out. So I was very clearly thinking, the first half of the book was way better than the second half of the book. But when you made the point of like, hey, you read this for the subjective enjoyment of reading the book, then if you strip that part out and it becomes a duty, a task on you, it's not going to be fun. Just like if you view maintenance of your motorcycle as being a punishment, then you're going to hate it. It's going to be awful. But if you view it as a part of the ownership of the thing or the value that you derive from having this motorcycle, it changes the whole situation.
Yeah, I like that point a lot. And like, I definitely had that situation. I think most people can identify with this, having to go through school and, having to read books in order to earn your grades, that I see a pathway of, books that I'm not convinced Ethan Frome is worth anyone's time. I don't think it is. I'm probably not going to listen if you want to say it's not. But Moby Dick, on the other hand, was also a book that I had to read and suffered through and was like, okay, well, let's get through this. But came back to later in my life, seeing it come up in various contexts. And I thought, okay, I like reading now. I'm going to go ahead and give this a shot. And it's among my top favorites, of all time.
Oh, I had the exact same experience. And I would say the other thing besides the time pressure that goes on with school is that you have a teacher that has a study guide, and your reading of that book has to map to that study guide. And if it doesn't, if you don't see undertones of homosexual erotica inside of Moby Dick, then you weren't reading it correctly and not taking the right meaning from it. And I like that was something
those
that
are
really
absolutely in there, by
bothered
the way.
me. What's that?
Those are absolutely in there, by the way.
Well, I'm saying like if that's the highlight fundamental
that's
point
a problem,
that you're
right?
pushing
Like,
through it. Yeah.
It's a fascinating part of the story, Queequeg and Ishmael.
My only point was if that's what the discussion has to be about, as opposed to the way that a book discussion can come from two friends sitting down, and we've talked about Moby Dick many times, and that was not required for us to be able to have a discussion. And it's probably just the nature of trying to get a group of 25 students ushered through, literature, and not necessarily some evil plot, but yet just it does make it so the experience of reading books is just like the experience of exercising that you get. If the only exercise you ever got was from PE, then you hate exercise.
No, absolutely. At the outset, your goal is to extract, like you said, the lessons that the teacher expects you to learn so that you can then, make those points on the exam and, get the lesson that you were supposed to. And it's like intellectual subjugation, right? Like I'm not, we still need to have schools and stuff. I don't have a better idea of how to educate people, but I see this trap and how it works. And I can tell you that that's how I felt for sure. And that I was just not interested in having the ideas that the teacher wanted me to have, right? Whereas if you're reading for yourself, I came across this phrase the other day. It was like the work of reading or the labor of reading, something like that. And the way it was explained, it was like, if you're just reading mindlessly, like mental chewing gum, that you're wasting your time, that the point of reading is to be getting something out of what you're doing, not to just be passing the time, you know? And I totally agree with that. And if you have your own set of ideas and interests and, you know, potential avenues that you could benefit from reading something while you're reading through and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to take a note about this. And you're excitedly writing something down because you don't want to forget it and then review that when you're done reading. Like, this is the whole point, incorporating it into what you're doing. And I think actually the book club does a really good job of that, because I feel like nobody expects that there's a right set of ideas that you're going to show up to the discussion with, right? Like you have your own ideas, and the value is that you can somehow attach an interesting perspective and communicate it to other people who have read the book now, because you both have shared this experience.
Yeah, and one of the tactics, or some of the things that you taught me that I have now put into all of the books that I'm reading, is I used to highlight and underline things, thinking like, oh, I'll go back and I'll read those underlined phrases. But now, if I underline something, that's only an indication that it probably should get written down in my index card. For every book that I have an index card, and I went out and bought like nice index cards, and they're the right size, and I got a good pen for it. And then I write down the lines that are valuable to me. And I've already found myself going back to the book that I have, and I just keep that index card in the book, pulling it out, and I have my own summary. I don't need Spark Notes for it, and I don't need to thumb through being like, where was that thing? And the act of writing it down commits it to my memory in a different way than reading does. And I have a pretty strong memory for what I read, but this brought it to a whole different level. And the only way that I could get there was for me to say, I'm not reading to finish the book. I'm reading to extract as much out of this as I can. And that requires that you get over the idea that finishing the book is the object of the reading.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I see the value of reading the physical, you know, paste and page edition, whatever you want to call it, of a book, rather, as opposed to listening to the book or reading it on, say, a Kindle or something like that. At least for me, I have a physical memory, and my mind has a model of kind of where I'm at in the book when I've encountered things. And if I think about a particular scene or a line or something, I can almost always remember what side of the fold it was on, whether it was at the top or the bottom, or, you know, the beginning or ending of a chapter or something like that. And there's kind of like this, it's like a GPU card, like in a computer, that you can use to accelerate various processes, that if you use this medium to ingest the book, you get this extra index that you can use to reference it. And that's certainly very valuable to me.
Yeah, the holding of a book for me, I sometimes will do audiobooks just as I'm running a lot or I'm doing some other things, but I've decided that there's a certain category of books that I want to do that for, and it's probably more like chewing gum, or more like, I don't quite have the time to watch this on a movie, but I'd like to have it, you know, the enjoying experience. But if there's something I'm trying to deeply pull out, I read it. One of the most fun things I've done is to have read the book and then do the audiobook, or vice versa, because then it's like committing in a whole different way in my memory. And it's not the same as watching a movie. You know, like, I think this is probably an obvious statement to you, but it bears repeating. Like, the reason reading a book is so much more enjoyable than watching a movie is that in a movie, they do all the work for you. Whatever the buildings are, whatever the rolling green grass, you see it as a literal representation. But when you're reading it, you're reading the rolling green grass. You're now integrating your understanding. What color green? What does it mean to be rolling? Have I ever seen hills like that before? And the author is using their words to paint a picture in your mind that you are a part of. And this really embracing that was one of the things that I didn't have many advantages as a young person, but once I fully embraced the fact that I could have these ideas painted into my brain and I could get into this dance, it made reading one of those things that was natural, almost like breathing for me.
That's awesome. When you describe that and kind of the process of going back and forth between the different mediums there, or media, that it actually recalled to mind my experiences with the current book club book, The Hobbit. So my first encounter there was that this was clearly some kind of cultural phenomenon that I had no knowledge of a long time ago. You know, I don't know, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that, 20. And so I came across this audiobook recording of it, in which it's actually recorded from a record that was produced in the 60s. And it's this guy who's like reading it like a storybook. And he individually does kind of different voices for the different characters, but it's still the same person. So it's not as jarring as the like typical radio play style thing that they do sometimes, which I don't generally like. And so I listened to that, and I just listened to that endlessly when I was, you know, at this age of my life, and I was, you know, doing other things and would just listen to that in the background. And then at some point, obviously the light flipped on, and I thought, well, why the heck don't I actually just go read this book? So I did. And when I read the book, it was like coming home. It was a joy. It was so wonderful because I had already loved these characters from his physical, you know, audio instantiation of them. But I didn't really feel like I knew everything that was going to happen because it was an abridged version of this book. So I was that was one of my happiest moments reading a book, was reading that for the first time. I don't think it's necessarily the best book in the entire universe. I just really enjoyed the way that it came to me.
Well, 8 pages. Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.